Hello everyone, I am Dr. Kanak Kalita and I welcome you to this new session in the workshop Recent Trends in Research Methodology, which is being conducted by the RSRI group, that is the REST Society for Research International. So this particular session is on how to write effective research articles, and essentially in this session we'll see uh, what are the basic procedures or what are the basic methodologies that you need to follow while writing a good research paper. And basically, in this particular session, we will try to look at what are the factors or what are the considerations that you have to take in when you are trying to write an article. How do you approach the article writing? Okay. So these are some of the considerations in this particular session. Now, before we proceed further, we must understand what is a research article and how it is different from a research proposal. So, a research article is usually a full account of the contribution or the research that you have done, and it is generally sent to a peer-reviewed scholarly journal. Now, why it is important to know that where it is sent, whether it is sent to a peer-reviewed scholarly journal or it is sent to a non-peer-reviewed scholarly journal, or whether it is sent to a trade journal or whether it is sent to a newspaper kind of thing. This is important because depending on what would be the final destination of this article, the kind of writing that would be involved would be different. Okay, so if you know that you will be targeting a very scientific audience, your writing approach should be that way. But if you are writing for a particular article, a research article, but a research kind of article, but that is the readership of that particular article is not scholars, but any general person, then the writing procedure will be different. Then you have to take into consideration that a lot of the people who will be reading your article may not be well versed in the field that you are writing. So you have to be more uh, uh, generalized in the you have to use more generalized kind of words and you should not use any jargons. So having said that, the scope of this particular session is only about peer reviewed scholarly articles or peer reviewed scholarly journal articles. So how does a research article differ from a research proposal? It differs in the sense that the objective, whenever, as I say, the objective of the article is different, then the entire thought process that goes in writing the article would also be different, and the flow of the article will also be different. So generally, research papers are a means of demonstration of the academic knowledge of a particular subject on which the researcher has worked on. So research papers in general or research articles in general are a complete account of the uh, a complete account of the entire research that has been conducted, right from the methodology to the conclusion. And in fact, in research articles, it is also important to give something which you call as the discussion. Not we have done some research and we have got some output or some results, but as a researcher, we should be able to present what we call the hypothesis or the explanation for why we are getting that kind of results. That is also very important in a research paper. So writing a research paper needs a lot of critical thinking. Whereas when we are trying to write a research proposal, it is more like a means of uh, convincing the reviewers to grant the proposal. Right. So a proposal is more persuasive piece of paper, or is a more persuasive piece of uh, research, which is the whole intent of the research proposal is to uh, convince the grant, convince the authority to release the grant. Okay. So although the research paper format is fairly standardized, the writing procedure it varies from person to person. It also varies from journal to journal, and it also varies from stream to stream. Okay, and that is something that we should remember. For example, the kind of the methodology or kind of the flow that common engineering or experiment-based papers will be different than the flow that a typical theory-based paper would have, and that flow will also be different from something like the like a opinion piece, which is uh, or a qualitative research that is done in the field of, suppose, say, humanities or social sciences. So, what is the importance of publication? Publication of article is important because it helps in terms of career progression with all the different kinds of incentives and uh, incentives and all the promotions linked to research, publication of research. It is important to meet the global standards in publishing journals. And the most important fact, or the most important necessity above all, is the proper spread of knowledge, or the proper spread of the research that we have done, so that others would also be benefited from the work that we have done. Now, what is the typical process of any article writing? So I would define the any typical process of article writing would start from something called the pre-writing, and then okay, the whole idea of while we are considering this process is that we are assuming that the experimentation or the research, the actual research has been done or it is undergoing. Okay, that is something that we are considering. We are considering that in some cases the actual research may have already ended. In some cases, the actual research may be ongoing. So this is only the writing process that we are describing. So during the writing process starts with something called the pre-writing, and then we go into something called the drafting. Then there is something called the revision, and we go for editing, and then we take it up for publication. So now we will see step by step what exactly these different steps, or what exactly these different processes mean. For example, pre-writing may consist of different kinds of things. For example, if suppose say you have already finished the experimentation, or finished the actual study, or the actual research you have already finished. Now you are going for the writing phase. Then in the pre-writing, you will do something like you will try to organize, you will try to create an outline of the entire study that you have done, or you will try to create an outline of the entire paper that you want to make. Means what would be the different sections, and what could be different subsections in within those sections that you try to decide in during this phase. Also, if you have already conducted all the research and you have the data available with you, now is the time to think about how do you want to present this data or present these results. So essentially, during the pre-writing phase, you decide how you want to present the data, whether you want to present it in tabular form, whether you want to present it in graphical form. All these kind of uh, decisions are generally taken in the pre-writing phase, because depending on how you want to present the data, again the flow of the article may vary. Okay. So also, in sometimes what happens is that uh, some researchers begin to write as early as possible. Means they start writing even when the experimentation or the data collection phase is still going on, or the research is ongoing. Okay. As I told you, writing can happen after the project is complete. That could be one strategy, and another strategy could be that writing could start as early as possible, even before you start the actual project, or even before you start the actual experimentation, or the simulation, or the data collection. You may start it, or even you can do it uh, during the course of actual data collection and all that, actual experimentation and all. So if you have already started early writing, if you have already started this writing phase early, means when all the data and all the results are still yet to come, then you get a lot of time, and you have a lot of flexibility in terms of deciding how you want to shape your research with respect to the writing part. Okay, so you get to make changes to the experiment design. You get to make changes to the data collection method. You get to make changes with the experimentation method and all that. So basically, in the pre-writing, we do a lot of brainstorming where we decide that how we want to present the idea, and what could be the central idea sometimes it happens is that in a research that we conduct, there may be multiple ideas, and there may be one central idea, and there may be certain small ideas that are lying around the central idea. So you get to decide, you have to decide during the pre-writing phase that what would be the central idea and what could be the subsidiary ideas. The next step of writing is drafting and revision. So mainly during this drafting and revision phase, you clear the main ideas that you have, and you try to formalize an actual plan of writing. Means you try to formalize the outline that you have created in the pre-writing part. You try to decide that these are the different sections that I am going to have in my paper, and this is the flow that I'm going to stick to. So these are some of the decisions that you take during the drafting and the revision phase. Also, you during this particular drafting and revision phase, what you do is that you try to find out, you try to interpret the data in during this time. Means you have already collected the data uh, as you are conducting the research, and after in the pre-writing phase, you decide how you want to present the data, whether in the tabular form or the graphical form or in any other statistical form. That you decide, and during the drafting and the revision phase, you decide in detail how you want to approach that particular, uh, how you want to interpret the data that you have. Okay, what could be your possible interpretation? These are some of the central ideas that you have to decide during this particular phase. So once you because from the same data there could be different kind of uh, interpretations that you can draw. Okay, so it is up to you that in which particular, as I told you, that you have to fix up a central idea. Now it is up to you that in which direction you want the data to point. Okay, and based on that, you have to write your, or you have to analyze your data, and you have to give supporting remarks based on that. Means maybe you can do some additional analysis, or maybe you can do some additional. Uh, you may have some uh, hypothesis regarding why the data is behaving in such a way, why you have got such and such result. So this you do during this particular phase. Also, during this phase, you make the entire flow organization of the paper. So in the previous part, that is the pre-writing part, you already decide the basic outline. But basic outline is something else. When basic outline means the headings or the subheadings that your paper is going to have. But here, when you decide the flow, you basically decide that how I'm going to arrange the sentences and how I'm going to arrange the flow of information. For example, in the introduction, suppose say you are working on a particularly uh, field, or in a particular field where you are suppose say trying to develop a product. Then you start, suppose say in the introduction you have to start from what is the need for that product and what are the alternatives that are there, and then you have to come down to the central idea step by step. So this is basically the flow of information, or the flow of organization. And then generally what you have to do in the drafting and the revision phase is that you have to use sound language, or the sound English writing language. Basically, I'm assuming that most of the participants here are going to write their research papers in English. So you have to use technically sound English, grammatically error-free English you have to use while writing and while having the drafting and the revision phase. Next comes the editing phase. Here, what we do is that try to go through the entire paper. We try to spell check it. We try to have the grammar checked, and we try to have the punctuation checked. The final step of this entire process could be the publication step, where you find a suitable journal for your article, and now based on that article, you format the uh, now based on that particular journal you format your article, because there suppose say there are different kinds of journals where different kinds of reference schemes are used. Someone may use Chicago, someone may use Harvard, or someone may use MLA. So depending on which journal you are sending, you have to organize your entire text and organize your entire paper in that particular journal's format. Okay, so that is also an essential step. Now, what is the typical sequence of writing a research article? Again, this sequence that I am telling you, this is strictly applicable. This is in general applicable for the sciences background where we do a lot of experimentation. The experimentation may be physical experimentation, there may be numerical experimentation, or there may be mathematical experimentation. Okay, this particular sequence of writing the research article may not work well for qualitative research because each qualitative research is unique in its own way. So I do not believe that this particular methodology would work in every kind of qualitative research. That is why what we are talking here, or what this sequence that we are trying to show here, is basically meant for quantitative research writing. So here we start with, generally we start with the methodology section. Why we start with the methodology section is that generally the methodology in any engineering or sciences or management is pretty well defined. For example, if you come to the engineering departments, or if you come to the engineering research and engineering field, you find that the experimentation process, though it may be the physical experimentation process, are very well defined. There are certain rules uh, by some apex bodies, and the researchers have to follow those rules to carry out the experimentation. In fact, when we are talking about health sciences or the biosciences, there also you see that they have a very standard methodology. For example, there may be a very standard methodology to deal with animal trials, or there may be a very standard methodology to deal with virus-related tasks. So that is why generally we start with the methodology section first, and this is the easiest one to write because the technique that we are going to use, or the methodology that we are going to use, is already well defined, and we only what we have to do is that we have to we have to come up with the relevant description regarding what has been done and in which order it has been done and which equipments have been used, or which softwares have been used. All this kind of information we mention in the methodology part. That is why in general we start with the methodology, as we have already completed this task, even if we are even if we have started writing the process when the experimentation is going on. So in a sense, we have already done with the methodology part. The next part, generally, which I advise all my PhD students as well as my MTech students to follow, as well as I to follow this, is the results and discussion. Why I like to write the results and discussion first is that because it gives me a lot of clarity when I'm writing the introduction and the conclusion. Essentially, what happens is that once we have the data available with us, once we've completed the entire experimentation or entire research, and the data is available to us, we try to look at the data. First, what we try to do is in the pre-writing phase, we try to look at the data and figure out whether representing this in graphical form or in uh, tabular form, which would be the most beneficial, and even if it is in graphical form, which particular graphical form would be the most beneficial, how it will be most easily understandable to the readers, how more amount of information can be compacted into the same graph or the same plot. This kind of thoughts we have to take in the pre-writing phase, and in the writing phase, we generally what we do is that we generally decide on what individual traits or characteristics this particular data analysis is going to have. So that is why I suggest that we write the research and discussion phase even after just after we complete the methodology, because in general, as soon as we carry out the research, as soon as we carry out the entire research and we start writing the results and the discussion, the entire research is still fresh in our mind. Whatever we have done is still fresh in our mind, so we can write it write down the results very effectively with respect to the methodology that we have followed. It is also important to understand that which methodology or focus on which methodology we have used. That is why writing the results with respect to the methodology is also very important. For example, in my own case, suppose say I'm working on deposition of thin films or deposition of coatings. So if I change the deposition technique or if I change the coating technique, the end result is going to be somewhat different, and thus the interpretation of the results is also going to be somewhat different. So that is why it is generally suggested that just after carrying out the methodology or just after finishing the entire research, we should start with the methodology, or we should do away with the methodology, and then we should immediately start with the results and discussion. The results and discussion also gives you a point, or also shows you the direction in which you have to write your introduction. Why is it so? It is so because suppose say in your results and discussion, you have found out some we have found out some you've done some experiments, and when I'm saying experiments, I mean both physical as well as numerical experiments. You have done some experiments, and based on these experiments, you have written the results. Now, when you write the results, you have to also give the logical explanation of why this particular results occur and how they affect the entire scheme of things. Now, after you have written the results and discussion, you now know that what exactly your researchers found out and how you justify that results that you have found out. Both of these things are clear in your mind now. Now, the next thing that you should do is that you should write the introduction. While writing the introduction, you should introduce in such a way that the results that you have derived or the discussion that you have given is directly linked to the introduction or directly linked to the problem that you have defined in the introduction. For example, it is a common practice in most experimentation related papers or simulation related papers or mathematical analysis related papers to first describe the or first identify the lacuna or the gap in the literature or the gap in the research in the introduction section. That is why this gap in the literature or this gap in the experiment in terms of the research can be more easily identifiable and more easily explainable if we do the results and discussion phase first. After the introduction phase, we should go for the conclusion, where depending on what claims we made in the introduction and what other people have, how we have analyzed the already existing literature in the introduction, we can draw up our conclusion that this and this had not been done previously, and this we have done, and this we have got, and we possibly believe that this is the reason why this and this has occurred. Like this, we have to end our conclusion. Then finally, we go for the abstract. We generally go for the abstract in the last because abstract is like an advertisement. If you see most of the databases that are there, for example, Google Scholar or Scopus or Web of Science, everywhere you will find that only the paper title and the abstract are freely available to read. So in a sense, the readers have to decide whether they want to further read this paper or not, depending on what they have read on the uh, title, the paper title, or the abstract. So in that way, the abstract is actually behaving like, or the abstract is acting like a ad for the entire, or like an advertisement for the entire paper that you have. So if your abstract is good enough and it combines or uh, it carries the entire crux of the research that you have done, then it would be helpful for the readers, because just by reading the abstract, they will come to know that this and these things are in this particular paper, and based on that, they can then take an informed decision whether they want to read the manuscript further or not. We also decide the keyword during this phase, but the keywords generally do not have much importance while we are writing the research paper. This is because we have to change our keywords often often we have to change our keywords depending on the journal that we are going to send. For the same article, we have to arrange the keywords in such a way that that they that they show a good match with the aims and scopes of the journal that we are going to send the paper to. Finally, the title of the paper is also an important aspect, and it is generally reserved for the last because of the same reason as the keyword. Because depending on which journal you are trying to send the article, you have to adjust the name accordingly, and the name should be something such that essentially uh, uh, gives a good idea or good representation of what the paper is about or what the article is about. Now, what is the typical research article structure? We see that the typical research article structure is something like this, where you have the abstract at the very top, and the abstract basically gives a problem statement where it defines that what is the problem that the researcher is trying to solve. It also gives an indication of the methodology that the researcher has used, and it also lists out the main contributions of the study of the current paper or the current article, and then it gives a claim or a conclusion in the end of the abstract. So essentially, the abstract is the ad which then invites is the ad or the advertisement which then invites the readers, or which then arouses the interest or disinterest of the readers, who will then either read the paper or not read the paper depending on whether their interest is aroused or not. Next comes the introduction, which basically it can be divided into three main underlying questions. The first question could be establishing the territory. Okay, so in this case, what we try to do is that we try to introduce the broad kind of field or the broad kind of domain that the particular problem is working in, or the particular problem is trying to solve. The broad kind of problem that the entire problem is that the entire research is trying to solve is introduced in the introduction part. Here we make claims regarding uh, the centrality of the research that we have done, and we make a generalized kind of discussion or on the topic that we have carried out the research on. Then we establish something called the niche. This uh, this basically helps us set the uh, subfield within the larger field that where the research have been done. So in this particular phase, what we try to do is that we try to find out what the other researchers have done and how they have not covered certain parts, and what could be the possible reason for this, and why studying this particular uncovered research gap is important. This type of answers, or these questions to answers to this type of questions are tried to uh, given are tried to uh, be given in this particular section. The final part of the introduction is the basically is again something that describes the entire purpose of the study, the entire claim of the study. So it tells that how it gives an outline of how the particular present research uh, is helpful, or how it addresses the research gap that was identified in the previous section, and it also introduces the principal findings that the article is going to have, and generally it is also the trend to indicate the structure of the remaining of the manuscript in this particular section. So the next comes the literature review. Often this literature review can be a part of the introduction itself, where it is placed before occupying the niche section, right? So in the literature review, essentially the literature that is available on the particular topic is analyzed, and essentially the uh, similarities between the current study and the previously drawn studies, as well as the dissimilarity between the current study and the previously drawn studies is drawn. Okay, so both of these are important to in their own way. For example, understanding the similarity between the current paper and the previous papers is important to establish the need of this particular paper. At the same time, establishing the dissimilarity between the current paper and the already published paper is also important to uh, to stake the claim that this is an original research and this is something that has not been done before. The novelty of the research has to be also be established in by reviewing the literature, by reviewing the existing literature. Next comes the most easy part of the entire manuscript, which is the methodology part. This part is easy, as I already told you, because the standard, the data collection process or the experimentation process or the simulation process is generally very well defined and it is generally fixed. There is a particular standard kind of way in which we have to carry out the experiments, may it be physical or may it be survey based or may it be uh, numerical. So that is why this particular portion is generally very easy to write, and the data that has been collected and the equipments that has been used and all this kind of information. For example, if it is survey based analysis, then the number of the uh, persons who have been asked to participate in the survey and all that, this kind of information are generally mentioned, or also mentioned in the methodology section. Next comes the result section, which basically gives the findings, and in the discussion, the reasons for the results or why these results have been found is try to be given. So in the discussion, generally what happens is that in the discussion, again, you can find a small subsection like the introduction where it reviews the findings and it discusses the outcomes and then it takes a claim. And another part of the discussion may be the evaluation, where it analyzes that the data or in this particular section, the interpretation of the data and interpretation of the results is given. And the final part of the results and discussion can be the conclusion, where essentially it is not like the conclusion of the entire paper, but the conclusion of the entire discussion of the small discussion that you have done, that this and this could be concluded from by looking at the data or by looking at the different data visualizations that you have given in the paper. Then comes the conclusion, where you uh, give a uh, give a final closing to the entire research that you have done, and you again reiterate the claim that you have made, and you again claim that and generally uh, evidence is given that this claim has been resolved, or this particular lacuna or this particular gap in the literature has been resolved. This kind of evidence is given in the conclusion section. Again, the research papers may include something called the acknowledgement section. This acknowledgement section is basically a thank you note to the different kind of people who are involved, people as well as institute who are involved in the article, in the research article. Sometimes this may be the senior management of your institute who has helped you or who has motivated you to do the research, or who has given you ample time to do the research. Sometimes this acknowledgement may be towards fund granting agencies like DST or SCRB, because they has made the funds available to you so that you can use the funds and the research could have been done. Sometimes this acknowledgement can be the system or towards the colleagues also, because they may have encouraged the study in some way or the other. Finally, the references section are given, where it is the normal trend is that they are arranged sequentially in the manner in which they appear in the text. Okay? This could be one form of the referencing. Another form of referencing could be the all the references are arranged in a alphabetical manner from A to Z. That could be another way of referencing. So there, now since you have now since the paper is done and the article is ready based on all the discussions that we have, the next step would be to decide on the authorship. And sometimes in a large collaborative project, it often becomes difficult to establish who the first author is or who would be the corresponding author. Generally, this kind of uh, queries or this kind of questions regarding the authorship can be resolved if initially, if in the very initial phase of starting the project, this is defined. Generally, after it is my personal experience that after the project is finished and after you have done everything and you have written the research paper and all, uh, fixing the authorship at the last stage is generally fixing the sequence of the authorship. Rather, I should say fixing the sequence of the authorship at the last phase can be a little difficult as compared to fixing the authorship at the starting of the project. Now, whom should we consider for giving authorship, and who can be authorship as per the uh, defined policies or as per the ethical policies or the ethical standards of writing a peer-reviewed scholarly article. So there could be three different conditions where the authorship can be given, and in general all these three conditions must be fulfilled for the for authorship to be given, or for authorship to be for the claim for the authorship to be stated. The first one is that all the authors should make substantial contribution towards the concept and the design of the study, or the acquisition of the data, or the analysis and the interpretation of the data. Sometimes what happens is that since a lot of work is done in supervisory mode, or done as a part of a learning scheme from a senior researcher, uh, uh, from a senior researcher, it is often also important that the weightage for the supervision, or the weightage for the uh, overall management of the project is also given. So that could also be a contribution towards the, that could also be a substantial contribution towards the research project, because managing the project or guiding the overall or overlooking the entire project could also be an important contribution towards the research. The next is that the next point is that the draft or the research article, the draft of the research article that is about to be submitted to the journal should be critically evaluated, and it should be all the authors should be involved in the critical evaluation of the text that has been written. Finally, all the authors should read the text, or all the authors should read the final version uh, of the manuscript, and they must approve that this is as per their wishes, and then only it can be taken up for the publication. Now, as a reviewer, the important cog, another important cog in the wheel of the entire peer-reviewed scholarly publication is the reviewer. It is important to understand that what are the criteria of the reviewer, so that they can be addressed in a very logical manner by by the authors in the writing phase. So the different kinds of criteria that the reviewers consider are, or the reviewers should consider are the importance, relevance, and the prevalence of the problem addressed. It is important to address, or it is important to assess that the particular problem that the authors have solved and taken up for publication in the journal is relevant in the current scenario. It is not something that has already been done numerous times. It should not be something that and that has already been uh, that has already become dormant. So the essentially the reviewer should check that the particular problem is novel, and there is a need for it to be solved in the current scenario or in the current context. That is an important criteria that the reviewer should consider. The reviewer should also consider that what is the writing style of the entire manuscript, because the reviewer may be expert in that particular field, and even a not very well written paper may be easily understandable to him, but after the paper is published, this paper may be read by different kinds of readers in that field, who may not be as well versed as the reviewer. So for them to understand a improperly written text or improperly written article may be quite difficult. That is why the reviewer should also take a decision, or should take a strong decision against in the regarding the quality of writing. He should ensure that the text or the article that he has reviewed and that he is about to accept has the flow of information in a very logical manner, and it is clearly written, and it is straightforward, and no ambiguity in the text is there. That he must ensure, and that the reviewer must look into these facts. The reviewer should also consider that the study that has been designed is properly designed, in a sense that there are no inherent bias in the study while the study was conducted, or there was no flaws in the design. For example, if a particular survey-based analysis is done regarding the acceptance of a particular product by male and female uh, citizens of India, then if the study takes, suppose say, opinions from 30 females and opinions from only two males, then that will be an improperly constructed study, and the uh, data analysis or the interpretation of the data arising from such a experimentation could be extremely flawed, and that may point towards a direction, or that may point towards a conclusion to the research which may not be actually applicable. Therefore, it is another important criteria of the reviewers to understand and uh, to address or to assess the um, study design in a very appropriate and rigorous as well as comprehensive manner. Finally, the reviewer should look at the uh, thoughtfulness that has been gone into the literature review, because again that is important. That though the author may claim that this particular problem has not been done in the literature previously, it may happen that the author has done a very narrow kind of study, or a very limited kind of literature review, because of which he has improperly thought that this particular problem has not been solved before. So for this also the reviewer should keep an eye. So the best way to know this, or the best way to understand this, that the literature of review is perhaps improper, is by looking at the kind of references that are there in the reference section. If suppose say most of the references are drawn from a single source, then chances are that the conclusion that is arriving out of those, or the interpretation that is arriving out of those literature review, may again be biased, because they are essentially coming from one particular source. So the reviewer should ensure that the literature review that is being done and the associated references that are there are from multiple sources, as well as they are from multiple uh, demographic conditions, as well as from multiple as well as from different spreads of time. They should not be too. They should not be those kind of papers which have been published, say 5 to 10 years ago. So the references that have been used should be recent, so that the readers are convinced, and so that the scientific community is benefited, in the sense that the latest know-how of the problem is taken from the literature, and the authors have worked on that know-how to improve it further, or improve or try to solve the problem in a more efficient way. Now, another important fact that the or another important condition that the criteria that the reviewer should look for is that the if suppose it is a sample-based study, then they have to look at whether the sample is large enough, and whether the sample is a proper representation of the entire population. Because often what happens is that a small sample is taken into account, and based on that, a claim is made for the entire population. So, if certain claims are made for the entire population, it is important that the sample that has been taken should be a proper representation of the entire population, for which the conclusions are drawn. Now, what could be the possible reasons of rejection of articles by the journals? Some of the common reasons are that the improper, incomplete, or insufficiently described statistics or data is there. Sometimes what happens is that the uh, amount of analysis that is needed to convince, or that is needed to prove a particular point, is not there, and then due to the lack of this kind of proper analysis, the paper may be rejected. Sometimes what happens is that certain authors try to over-interpret their results. It means they, by using only, suppose say, by using only a limited number of sample points, they try to overtly uh, overtly assess the results that they have, and they try to overtly stress on the interpretation of the data. In that case also, it may lead to rejection. Sometimes what authors may do is that they may take the use of inappropriate or suboptimal or in sufficiently described population or instruments. In that case also, it may be a reason for rejection. As I already mentioned about the bias study of the male and female population in a particular country regarding the suitability of a particular product. So if respondents from only one particular say from only female respondents are much more than the male respondents, then what will happen is the samples that would come in would be, or the answers that would come in, or the responses that would come in would be biased, and therefore the entire study may be flawed. Finally, it is another important reason of rejection, or another major reason of rejection could be that the text of the particular manuscript has been very poorly written. It is very difficult to understand what the authors have written, and thus the journal editors may feel that it may be of no value to the readers, since he would not be able to understand the text. So these are some of the reasons. These are some of the most common reasons for which the papers are rejected, and these are some of the uh, reasons for which the author should be very conscious, and he should take steps against this, when steps against rectifying this, when he has started uh, when he has started to take on this study. Now, what could be the positive side of the rejection for your article? It can be that generally what happens is that everybody faces rejection, and there is a particular proverb where we say that failures are the pillars of success. So unless you fail a couple of times, you will not be able to appreciate the success when you have it. So if your articles get rejected, then we should not lose hope. Rather, we should take it as a means of improving ourselves. Generally, what happens is that if a particular paper goes into the peer review, and after peer review it is rejected, it means some kind of comments were forwarded to you, or some kind of comments were given on the particular manuscript that you have submitted. So this comments by the reviewers may be very helpful, or may be very constructive for you, or for the upcoming research, for the current paper as well as for the upcoming research, in the sense that they these comments will try to bring out the flaws that are there uh, in the methodology, or suppose in the interpretation of the results overall in the research that you have. It will point out the flaws that are there in the research that you have, and then by working on these particular points, you can uh, improve the research, not for only for this particular paper or this particular article, but for all your similar related future studies. Generally, what happens is that um, if you submit to another manuscript, uh, you should begin as if it is a new manuscript. So you should also take, as I mentioned, that you should also take care of the advantage of the reviewers' comments. And you should always, before sending to any journal, you should always try to look at the aims and scope of the journal, and you should try to make the paper focused for that particular journal before trying to send to that particular journal. So overall, writing is a very research paper writing is a very complex step, where it has to be approached in a very logical manner. If it is a qualitative research, the approach would be different. If it is a quantitative research, the approach would be different. So in this session, we saw some of the basic reasons why papers are rejected. We also saw what is the basic structure of a paper. So in the next session, we'll look at a couple of examples of well-written papers, and we'll also look at a couple of tools which can help us improve the productivity while writing research papers. I thank all of you for attending this session. Thank you.